My boss humiliated me, so I made him lose everything. I never saw it coming. I had been working at the company for 3 years, moving up from an entry-level assistant to a mid-tier manager. I had earned my place, showing up early, staying late, and keeping my head down. My boss, Trevor, a man in his mid-40s, had always been a bit of a bully, but I was able to tolerate it because I was focused on my career goals. That is, until the day he humiliated me in front of the entire office. It was a Wednesday afternoon, one of those rare moments when the office was relatively calm. The open concept space was filled with the sound of keyboards clicking, phones ringing, and the low hum of casual conversations. I had been preparing for a major presentation to one of our biggest clients, so I was already on edge. Trevor had been breathing down my neck for days, demanding perfection in every aspect of the project. Then it happened. Trevor stood at the front of the room, hands in his pockets, looking at me with that condescending smile of his. He had always enjoyed making me the target of his jokes, sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle. That day, however, he took it too far. "All right, everyone," Trevor said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Let's take a moment to acknowledge our star manager here, our expert in client relations, who somehow managed to send the wrong version of the proposal to the client. Well done." My face went hot. I couldn't believe it. I hadn't sent any proposal to the client. At least, not the wrong one. But in front of the entire team, Trevor made it seem like I was responsible for the blunder. His words stung more than I could ever admit. I could feel the eyes of my colleagues on me, some awkwardly looking away, others trying to suppress their laughter. I stood there frozen, humiliated. "But I didn't," I began to say, but Trevor cut me off with a wave of his hand. "Let's not make excuses, okay? Just another example of someone who's more interested in looking busy than actually doing the work," he said, turning his back to me as if I didn't matter. I tried to hold back my anger, but something inside me snapped. This wasn't just an embarrassing moment. It was a pattern. Trevor had made my life miserable for the past few months, always undermining my efforts, belittling me in front of the team, and taking credit for my work. But this time, it was different. This time, I wasn't going to let him get away with it. That night, as I sat at home, I thought about what had just happened. I had always been the kind of person who believed in taking the high road, in letting things go. But Trevor had pushed me too far. And as I thought about it more, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to play by his rules anymore. I spent the next few days quietly plotting my revenge. It wasn't going to be some petty act of retaliation. It would be more calculated, more refined. I knew Trevor's weaknesses better than he knew mine. I had watched him carefully, taking note of the cracks in his seemingly perfect facade. The first step was simple. I started gathering evidence. Trevor, like many people in his position, had a tendency to overcompensate. He liked to act like he was above reproach, but his actions were often reckless. I dug through company emails, memos, and digital records, finding a treasure trove of his mistakes, his questionable decisions, and even some unethical practices that could easily ruin his reputation. It took a while, but soon I had enough dirt to bring him down. Next, I made a few discreet phone calls. Trevor was a man who liked to brag about his connections, his golf buddies, his influence in the industry, his privileged status. I reached out to a few people he had crossed over the years, those who had been wronged or ignored by him. One by one, they began to send me information. Complaints, records, and stories of how Trevor had used his power to manipulate situations in his favor. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how deep the rot went. But I wasn't just interested in ruining Trevor's career. I wanted to make sure he never felt safe again. I used my position at the company to slowly start planting the seeds of doubt among his superiors. I leaked a few key pieces of information, anonymously of course, about his past behavior and questionable business decisions. I made sure to cover my tracks, leaving no trace of my involvement. The final blow came when I uncovered a series of financial discrepancies in the department Trevor had managed. It wasn't much, but it was enough to raise suspicion. I carefully handed this evidence to the right people, knowing it would trigger an internal investigation. The truth was, Trevor had been skimming from the company for years, using his position to funnel money into personal accounts and making shady deals behind closed doors. As the weeks passed, things started to unravel for Trevor. The internal investigation, which I had expertly nudged along, grew in intensity. His once unshakable confidence began to falter. Rumors spread through the office, and his connections in the industry began to distance themselves from him. The higher-ups, once enamored with his charisma, started to question his competence. And then, one day, it all came crashing down. Trevor was called into a meeting with HR. He came out an hour later, his face pale, his shoulders slumped. It was over. He was fired, not just from the company, but from the industry as a whole. His reputation was destroyed, his career in shambles, and his connections dissolved like dust in the wind. I stood there, watching as Trevor packed up his things, looking like a man who had lost everything. I didn't feel a sense of triumph, not exactly. But I did feel something else. A quiet satisfaction. I had done it. I had made him pay for what he had done to me, for all the humiliation, for every cruel word and belittling comment. And as he walked out of the building for the last time, I couldn't help but smile. It was the first time in a long while that I felt like I had control over my own fate. Trevor might have lost everything, but I had finally gained something far more valuable: my dignity. A few weeks passed since Trevor's downfall, and the office, though still buzzing with the usual activities, felt different. The shadow of his presence, which had once loomed over us all, was gone. The atmosphere was lighter. People seemed to be working more efficiently. And for the first time in months, I saw my colleagues laughing, chatting freely during breaks without the constant fear that Trevor would burst in, ready to criticize or belittle. But despite the apparent sense of relief in the office, there was something gnawing at me. I had succeeded in taking Trevor down, but I couldn't help but feel that there was still something unfinished about it all. Maybe it was the nagging thought that I had let myself become consumed by revenge. Maybe it was the empty satisfaction that didn't quite fill the hole he had left in my life. One late afternoon, as I was going through some emails and preparing for the next phase of my work, I received a message that made my heart skip a beat. It was from a senior executive at the company, Bethany, the CFO. She was inviting me to meet her for coffee the following morning. At first, I thought it was a standard check-in, but the tone of the email hinted at something more serious. I arrived at the cafe the next day, slightly early, and waited nervously. When Bethany arrived, she looked calm, but with a piercing gaze that immediately put me on edge. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, taking a seat across from me, her eyes locking onto mine. "I wanted to talk to you about something sensitive." I swallowed hard. My mind raced through the possibilities. Maybe she knew something about my involvement in Trevor's downfall? Had I made a mistake? Was there something I missed? "First," she said, before I could even begin to speak, "I want you to know that we appreciate all your hard work. Your performance has been impressive, and the way you handled the presentation for that big client last month didn't go unnoticed. You're more than capable, and that's why I'm here." I let out a small breath of relief, though I was still tense. "Thank you, Bethany," I said, my voice steady but unsure. She smiled briefly before continuing. "But there is also something else. After Trevor's firing, I did a bit of digging into some of the work he'd left behind, and I came across something interesting." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Bethany leaned in slightly, her expression unreadable. "There were some records I found. Notes, conversations, things he'd written down during his last few weeks with us. And they mention your name a lot." I could feel my heart start to pound. My mind immediately went to the worst-case scenario. Had Trevor figured out what I had done? Was this going to be the moment it all came crashing down? "You see," Bethany continued, "there's one thing Trevor did get right in his final days. He didn't trust the people around him. And in his paranoia, he started taking notes on everyone, especially on those he thought might be a threat to him." She paused, letting the silence hang in the air. I swallowed hard. What does this have to do with me? Bethany's eyes softened just a fraction, as though she were trying to gauge my reaction. He thought you were after his position. He thought you were a threat to his power in the company, and he started preparing to undermine you in ways you never even realized. All that time you spent trying to do your job, trying to keep things afloat while he acted like a tyrant, he was setting you up. The words hit me like a punch in the gut. I had suspected that Trevor had been aware of my ambition, my desire to rise above the petty politics and make something of myself in the company. But to hear that he had actively been plotting against me in those final months, it shook me to my core. But here's the thing, Bethany said, leaning back in her chair, her tone now more conspiratorial. What Trevor never counted on was you being smarter than he was. You saw through him long before he could do any real damage. And because of that, we're giving you an opportunity. I blinked, unsure if I had heard her correctly. What do you mean? What opportunity? She gave me a knowing look. We need someone who can lead the department now that Trevor's gone. Someone with fresh ideas and a drive to make real change. Someone who's not afraid to take risks and shake things up. She smiled slightly. And I think you're that person. My mouth went dry. Are you saying you want me to take over? Bethany nodded. Yes, you've already proven you have the skills. We just need someone with the right mindset to step up, and we think you're more than capable. I stared at her, my mind reeling. This wasn't just a job offer. It was a chance to truly make my mark. It was the kind of opportunity most people spent their entire careers chasing, and here it was, falling into my lap. But with this new power came a new responsibility. I would have to face the challenges of leadership that Trevor had once manipulated to his advantage. I would have to make decisions that would affect the entire team, ensuring that no one would feel the way I had under his reign. I'll take it, I said, my voice more confident than I felt. Bethany's smile widened. Good. I'll have HR get everything in motion. Just remember, this is your chance to change things. Don't let the past cloud your judgment. We need you to be the leader this company deserves. As I left the cafe, I felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. My path had been cleared in a way I never expected, and now it was up to me to shape the future of my career and the company on my terms. I had made Trevor lose everything, but in the process, I had gained something far more valuable, the chance to rewrite my own story. And this time, I wasn't going to let anyone stand in my way. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. HR processed the change, and within a month, I was officially promoted to head of the department. As I walked into the new office, larger, more modern, with a view of the city skyline, I couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. I had worked hard for this moment, and while Trevor's downfall had been a catalyst for it, I knew I had earned it on my own merit. But with the promotion came a weight I wasn't prepared for. The team that once feared Trevor now looked to me for direction, and I could sense their uncertainty. I was still the same person they had known, but now I was expected to lead them. There were moments when I felt like a fraud, like everyone knew how I had played the game, how I had brought Trevor down. I worried that some of them might even resent me for it. I knew I had to act quickly to establish my credibility and change the culture in the department. Trevor's toxic reign had left deep scars. His manipulation, his constant undermining of anyone he deemed a threat, had made everyone paranoid and reluctant to speak up. It was my job to rebuild trust, not just with the team, but with the higher-ups who had, until recently, only seen me as another cog in the machine. I called a meeting with my team, all of us seated around a large conference table. The room was tense. I could tell they were still sizing me up, waiting for me to slip up. Look, I know this is a big change, I began, keeping my voice steady. And I'm sure you're all wondering how this is going to go. But I want to make one thing clear. I'm here to lead you, not control you. Trevor left behind a lot of chaos, but it's up to us to clean up the mess and build something better. There was a slight shift in the room. A few of the employees exchanged glances, some nodding subtly, as if they were relieved by my words. I pressed on. emphasizing collaboration, transparency, and a new approach to problem solving. It was all about creating a space where ideas could flow freely and where we could all take responsibility for the department's success. Over the next few months, I started to see the shift in the team. Slowly, the tension started to dissipate. People were more willing to contribute during meetings, and I noticed that some of them were even stepping up to take on new responsibilities. I could sense a new energy, one that had been missing under Trevor's oppressive rule. But of course, not everyone was on board. A few of the old guard, the ones who had been close to Trevor, kept their distance. They weren't sure if I was someone they could trust, or if I was just another opportunist who would burn bridges the moment it suited me. They watched me carefully, waiting for a mistake, something to confirm their suspicions. One afternoon, I received a message from one of the higher-ups, Vincent, the CEO's right-hand man. He asked me to meet with him in his office. I felt a knot in my stomach. This was the moment I had been preparing for, the moment that would either solidify my position or lead to my downfall. When I entered his office, he greeted me with a curt nod, then gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit down. We need to talk." "Of course," I replied, doing my best to keep my voice even. Vincent didn't waste any time. "You've been doing well so far. Better than expected, actually. But there's something I need to address. The board is still unsure about you. They're worried that your rise to power wasn't entirely organic." I swallowed. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward, his tone turning more serious. "I know about your involvement in Trevor's downfall, and the board doesn't want any drama following you, no matter how justified it might have been. We need stability, and right now they're questioning whether you can provide that." I had been expecting something like this, but hearing it from Vincent, someone with such influence, made it hit harder. "Let me make one thing clear," I said, trying to remain calm. I didn't bring Trevor down just for the sake of it. He was toxic for the company, and I did what had to be done. But I didn't do it out of spite. I did it to protect the future of the team and the business. Now that I'm in charge, I'm focused on making things better. Not just for me, but for everyone. Vincent studied me carefully, his expression unreadable. "I can respect that. But the board doesn't care about what's in the past. They care about results. You need to prove that you can lead without bringing more controversy. You need to show them you're capable of taking this company forward. The pressure's on." I nodded, my mind racing. "I understand. I'll make sure we're headed in the right direction." After the meeting, I felt a wave of frustration wash over me. It wasn't enough that I had fought my way to the top. Now I had to fight to keep my position. I couldn't afford any more distractions, not even the lingering resentment from some of the team members. I needed to prove myself beyond Trevor's shadow, beyond whatever suspicion still hovered over my methods. And that's when I realized what I needed to do next. I had already built momentum with the team, but now I had to go further. I had to show the board that I could turn the department into a powerhouse, that I could outperform every expectation. I needed to set us on a course that no one could argue with, where the results spoke louder than any gossip or doubt. In the weeks that followed, I worked tirelessly to make strategic changes. I pushed for more efficient processes, streamlined our operations, and forged stronger relationships with key clients. I also made sure to recognize the efforts of the team, rewarding them for their hard work and dedication. Slowly, the department started to transform into something better, something stronger. But it wasn't just the numbers that would speak for me. I needed to prove that I could lead with integrity, that I wasn't just about getting ahead, but about building a team that could thrive long after I was gone. As I looked out of my office window one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I knew I had started something bigger than myself. The road ahead was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. I was ready for whatever came next. As months went by, the department I inherited transformed. We became more than just a collection of people doing their jobs. We became a cohesive, motivated team. The office morale was higher than it had been in years, and the results were undeniable. Revenue was up, client satisfaction was soaring, and even the annual company review was glowing in comparison to previous years. Yet, as much as I tried to focus on the work at hand, I couldn't ignore the fact that something was still missing. Despite the improvements, there remained a subtle tension in the air. I couldn't shake the feeling that the board, though pleased with the results, still didn't fully trust me. They were waiting for a mistake, a slip-up, something to confirm their doubts about my rise to power. I could feel their eyes on me whenever I entered a room, their scrutiny making me second-guess even the smallest of decisions. Then the ultimate test came. It started with a seemingly innocent project, an important proposal for a new client, one that could secure a multi-million-dollar deal. The kind of deal that would solidify my place in the company's future. The higher-ups were all excited about it, and for good reason. But soon after the project was handed over to my team, I began to notice something strange. One of my senior managers, Mark, came to me one afternoon looking pale. I don't know how to say this, but I think someone's tampered with the proposal, he said, his voice tight with anxiety. I frowned. What are you talking about? Mark hesitated, then handed me a printed version of the proposal that had been marked up with glaring errors, misleading information, inconsistent data, and figures that simply didn't add up. It was as if someone had intentionally sabotaged the proposal to ensure that it wouldn't be accepted. This wasn't the version I signed off on, Mark said, his eyes wide. The real proposal. Everything was aligned perfectly. But this... He gestured to the paper in my hands. This is a disaster. I could feel the blood rush to my head. My mind raced. I knew this wasn't just a coincidence. Someone had deliberately set this up to undermine me, to discredit my leadership in front of the board and the client. But who? And why now? I immediately called an emergency meeting with my closest team members to figure out how this could have happened. It didn't take long for suspicions to surface. One of my own senior team members, Rachel, who had always been more reserved and seemed slightly distant ever since Trevor's downfall, had been acting oddly over the past few weeks. She was quiet, almost too quiet, and she hadn't been contributing much to the meetings lately. I'm not saying Rachel is behind this, but I can't ignore the timing, Mark said, looking uncomfortable. She's been underperforming lately, and now this? It just feels off. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the evidence was starting to stack up. Rachel had been one of Trevor's loyalists, someone who had benefited from his favoritism and had resented the changes I had brought to the team. She never openly challenged me, but I knew she was one of the few who hadn't fully embraced the transformation. Her actions, or lack of action, spoke volumes. I decided to confront Rachel directly. It wasn't going to be easy, but I needed to get to the bottom of this. And if she was involved in sabotaging the proposal, she had to face the consequences. I found her in the break room, nervously fiddling with her coffee cup. She looked up when I entered, her eyes betraying nothing. Too practiced, too controlled. Rachel, we need to talk, I said, my voice firm but not accusatory. She stiffened slightly but didn't say anything. Mark showed me the version of the proposal that's been tampered with. I continued, and I have reason to believe that you may know something about it. Her eyes flickered briefly, but she quickly masked the emotion. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, her voice tight. I crossed my arms. I'm not here to make accusations, Rachel. I just need to understand what happened. This could jeopardize everything we've worked for. And if someone is intentionally trying to sabotage the deal, I need to know who it is. For a long moment, there was silence. Then she sighed, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of the situation had finally hit her. It wasn't supposed to go this far, she muttered, almost to herself. My heart sank. Rachel, what are you talking about? She took a deep breath, her eyes finally meeting mine. I was part of Trevor's inner circle. And when he was fired, I thought things would go back to the way they were. I thought I could work under him again one day. But then you came in, and everything changed. I didn't know how to handle it. I thought maybe I could show the board that you weren't fit to lead. But it was never supposed to get this messy. I didn't want to ruin the company. Her confession hit me like a slap in the face. I had suspected something was off, but hearing it from her lips was a blow to my trust in the team. Still, I couldn't let her jeopardize everything we had built. "I'm going to have to report this," I said, my voice cold. "You've crossed a line, Rachel." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know. I'm sorry. I don't know what came over me." I didn't feel any satisfaction in her apology. The damage had been done and there was no turning back. I had to protect the company, and I couldn't let anyone undermine the progress we had made. I handed the evidence over to HR and the board, making sure they understood the gravity of the situation. Rachel was placed on leave pending further investigation, and the sabotage of the proposal was handled swiftly. The client was informed about the mistake, and we were able to recover and present them with a corrected proposal on time. But in the end, it wasn't just Rachel who had to face consequences. It was also the board, who had underestimated my ability to lead. They had thought I was just a reactionary manager, someone who had climbed the corporate ladder by accident, not through skill and determination. I made sure to take full control of the situation, pushing for transparency and accountability, ensuring that no one else would ever question my leadership again. I had proven to them all that I wasn't just a survivor. I was a leader, and I would stop at nothing to protect what I had built. And as the dust settled and things began to return to normal, I realized that the real power wasn't in taking down my enemies. It was in standing tall, no matter the obstacles, and ensuring that nothing could ever break me again. The aftermath of the sabotage was nothing short of a storm. The board members who had once doubted me were now forced to reevaluate their opinions. Rachel's actions had given them a wake-up call, not just about her loyalty, but about my ability to handle crises. The board was no longer just watching me with suspicion. They were watching with respect. The company itself, however, had to recover. It wasn't just about fixing the proposal. It was about fixing the culture, the trust that had been shattered under Trevor's reign, and rebuilding a reputation that had been strained by past mistakes. For the next several weeks, I threw myself into the work, pouring energy into both the business and the morale of my team. There were still some lingering doubts, especially with the few employees who had been close to Rachel, but they saw the results. They saw how swiftly I handled the sabotage and how we pulled together as a team to fix it. Slowly, the seeds of trust started to sprout again. And then, just when I thought we were finally turning the page, another curveball came. It started with an email from the CEO. There was a meeting scheduled for the following week, one that was marked as urgent. I'd heard whispers that it was an important discussion about the future direction of the company. Naturally, my mind went straight to the worst-case scenario. Was I being called in to answer for the sabotage? Had I done something to make them second-guess my leadership? The meeting day arrived, and I was filled with nervous energy. I dressed in my best suit, even though I knew I had already earned my place. The meeting room was filled with the usual high-level executives, all seated with serious expressions. The tension in the air was palpable. As I sat at the table waiting for the meeting to begin, Vincent, who had been supportive of me since Trevor's firing, gave me a small nod. He was one of the few I felt I could trust completely in that room. I returned the nod, trying to calm my nerves. The CEO, Elizabeth, stood at the front of the room, flipping through some papers before addressing us. "Thank you for coming today," she said, her voice commanding yet calm. "I've called this meeting because we're facing a crucial decision about the company's future. After a lot of discussions, we've decided to make a significant change to our leadership structure." I felt my heartbeat quicken. Was this it? Was I about to lose everything? Elizabeth continued. "As part of our ongoing efforts to steer the company into the next phase of growth, we're restructuring a few departments. We need someone who can not only manage operations but help lead the company's vision forward." The room went silent. My mind raced, heart pounding in my chest. "We've been impressed with the way you've handled the transition in your department," she said, her eyes locking onto mine. "And after careful consideration, we've decided to offer you the role of Vice President of Operations." My breath caught in my throat. VP? Was she serious? It took me a moment to process what she was saying. She wasn't just acknowledging the success I'd had in my current role. She was promoting me to a leadership position that would have me overseeing multiple departments and playing a key role in shaping the company's strategy. I couldn't believe it. In just a few short months, I had gone from barely scraping by under Trevor's oppressive leadership to earning a position of power in the company. It felt surreal. But what about the team I've been managing? I asked, my voice steady despite the shock I felt. Elizabeth smiled. You'll still be working closely with them, but you'll also be overseeing a broader scope of projects. It's time to take your leadership to the next level. The room began to murmur in approval, and Vincent, who had been silently observing, now gave me a broader smile. I could tell he was genuinely pleased for me. Of course, I replied, my mind racing to catch up with the magnitude of the situation. I'm honored, and I'm ready for the challenge. And just like that, my entire world shifted again. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of new responsibilities, intense meetings, and long hours. The position came with its own set of challenges, but I thrived under the pressure. I was no longer just a department head. I was now part of the decision-making process at the highest level. My voice mattered in shaping the company's future, and I made sure it was heard. One of the first things I did in my new role was to push for a company-wide initiative to address communication issues. I wanted to ensure that no one, regardless of position, ever felt like they were working in the shadows, afraid to speak up. The toxic culture Trevor had fostered had no place in the company anymore, and I would make sure of that. In my first board meeting as vice president, I presented a new framework for collaboration across departments, one that emphasized transparency and open communication. It was well received, and I could see that my colleagues were finally starting to see me not just as a survivor of corporate politics, but as a leader with a clear vision for the company's future. Despite the victories, there was still an underlying pressure. The higher I climbed, the more I realized that the corporate world wasn't just about managing projects or teams. It was about navigating the subtle games, the power plays, and the endless demands for results. But I had already proven to myself that I could rise above it all. I had taken down Trevor, rebuilt a broken team, and secured a position of leadership. Now, nothing could stand in my way. As I sat in my new office, overlooking the city once again, I allowed myself a rare moment of reflection. The journey had been long, and it hadn't always been easy. But in the end, I had taken control of my fate. And the company's. The shadow of Trevor and all the doubts and insecurities I had once faced felt like a distant memory. It was my time now. And I would make sure it stayed that way. As weeks turned into months, I settled into my role as Vice President of Operations. The team was more unified than ever. The projects were running smoothly, and I was finally able to see the fruits of all the hard work I'd put into rebuilding the department. I could almost taste the success. The future looked bright, and I felt an overwhelming sense of pride in what we had accomplished. But just as everything seemed to be falling into place, something unsettling began to simmer beneath the surface. It started with small things: whispers in the hallways, unreturned emails, vague comments during meetings. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But then, one day, I received an anonymous message in my inbox. It was a single line: "You're not as untouchable as you think." My stomach twisted with unease. I couldn't tell if it was just a threat or the start of something more serious. Whoever had sent it clearly knew about my past, about my rise to power, and wasn't happy with it. I immediately started looking into the possibility of internal sabotage, but everything seemed fine on the surface. No one stood out as an obvious threat, but there was an underlying tension, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I knew I couldn't let my guard down. I'd climbed this high because I'd learned the hard way not to trust everyone. Trevor had taught me that. But now I was in a much more vulnerable position. People were watching me more closely than ever, waiting for me to slip, waiting for me to make a mistake. The higher up you go, the more enemies you make, even if you don't realize it. A few days after the message, things took a turn for the worse. I received another anonymous email, this time with an attachment. It was a series of incriminating documents, forged to make it look like I had manipulated financial reports to cover up a major mistake. The email included a warning. I have everything you've done. Don't think you're safe. One wrong move and this will go public. My heart sank. If this got out, everything I had worked for, everything, could be ruined. The documents were convincing enough that anyone unfamiliar with the company's operations might believe them, and the timing was perfect to strike at my reputation. I immediately called a private meeting with my most trusted team members. Mark and Vincent were the first to arrive, their faces tense. "What's going on?" Mark asked, clearly concerned. "I've been targeted," I said, showing them the email and documents. "Someone's trying to frame me for something I didn't do." Vincent's brow furrowed as he studied the papers. "This looks, well, professionally done. Whoever's behind this knows their way around corporate operations." I nodded, my mind racing. This feels personal. Someone is playing a long game, trying to take me down from within. Vincent leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "This is the price of power. You've got enemies now, and they're not going to stop until they see you fall." I could see the weight of the situation settling on him, too. This wasn't just a matter of company politics anymore. It was a battle for survival. I couldn't afford to let this slip through the cracks. I had to be strategic, meticulous. Whoever was behind this had to be exposed, but I couldn't do it recklessly. One wrong move and my career would be over. "I need to figure out who's behind this," I said, my voice firm. "And I need to make sure it never reaches the board or the public." Vincent's expression softened and he leaned forward. "We'll help you, but this is going to be messy. You need to be prepared for what's coming." That night, I went through the emails and documents again, looking for any clue, anything that could give me an edge. The attachment seemed to come from a personal account, but the information in the files had been altered just enough to make them seem legitimate. It wasn't something someone from the outside could have easily obtained. It had to be someone within the company. I couldn't help but think back to my past. I'd survived Trevor's betrayal, but this felt different. This wasn't just about a toxic leader trying to tear me down. This was a calculated move by someone who knew exactly how the system worked, how to exploit weaknesses, and how to turn things around to their advantage. The next day, I took a calculated risk. I arranged a one-on-one meeting with Rachel. She was still on leave, but I knew that if there was anyone who could have been behind this, it was her. The resentment she had toward me was still fresh, and I needed to gauge whether she was involved, or if someone else was pulling the strings. We met in a quiet cafe, far from the office. Her face was gaunt, the weight of what had happened clearly taking a toll on her. I could see the bitterness in her eyes, but there was also a trace of something else. Regret, perhaps. "Rachel, I need to ask you something," I began, my tone measured but direct. "There's been a threat against me. Someone's trying to ruin my reputation, and I need to know if you're involved." She flinched, but quickly masked it with a deflection. "I've already told you everything, and I've paid for my mistakes. I'm not involved in anything like that. I'm just trying to move on." I studied her carefully. Was she lying? Or was she simply trying to distance herself from the chaos she had caused? "Rachel, this isn't a game. Whoever is doing this knows exactly what they're doing. I can't afford to make any mistakes, and I need to know if you've been approached by anyone, if anyone's trying to manipulate you." Her face hardened. She shook her head slowly, her voice cold. "I'm not part of whatever this is, but you should know. There are people out there who want you to fail. People who never liked the way you came to power." The words struck me like a blow. "Who?" She paused, clearly weighing her options. "I don't know all the details, but there are still people in the company who feel like you don't belong, and you've made more than a few enemies along the way. Watch your back." It was the most direct warning she'd given me, but it wasn't enough. I needed more, and I needed it fast. As I walked back to my car, I knew one thing for certain. The battle wasn't over. Whoever was trying to take me down had a plan, and I was going to make sure it failed. I had come this far, survived betrayal and sabotage. Now I was about to face a new kind of enemy, one that would test my limits in ways I had never imagined. But I wasn't going down without a fight. This time, I would make sure the stakes were too high for anyone to bring me down. The warning Rachel had given me echoed in my mind long after I returned to the office. I could no longer afford to sit back and wait for something to happen. I had to act, and fast. Someone in the company wanted me gone. I didn't know who yet, but the pressure was building. Every decision, every move I made now felt like it could be the one that brought everything crashing down. I knew I couldn't do this alone anymore. Vincent and Mark had been solid allies through it all, and I needed them more than ever. That night, I called a private meeting with both of them, and we gathered in my office, far from the prying eyes and ears of the rest of the company. "Rachel's out of the loop," I said, the weight of her words settling on my chest. "But someone else is trying to bring me down. I don't know who, but they're good. They know how to cover their tracks." Vincent frowned, clearly worried. "We need to think strategically here. Whoever's behind this knows exactly how to hit you where it hurts. Your reputation, your integrity. If they're targeting you like this, they know you're a threat." Mark, ever the optimist, added, "We can fight this. We just need to find out who's pulling the strings and stop them before it gets out of control. Before it gets..." I nodded. "That's the plan. But we need to be discreet. I don't want anyone, especially the board, catching wind of this until we have solid proof." We spent the next few hours brainstorming potential suspects, trying to piece together who might have the motive, the means, and the opportunity to carry out a plan like this. There were plenty of candidates. People who had been passed over for promotions. People who had been loyal to Trevor. Even people who felt slighted by my rise to power. But none of them seemed like the kind of person who would have the foresight and precision to carry out such an elaborate attack. As the night wore on, I felt an uncomfortable realization settle in. This wasn't just an isolated attack. It was part of something bigger. Someone had been planning this for a long time. It was a calculated move. A slow burn designed to put me in a position where I couldn't fight back without damaging my reputation. Whoever was behind this had studied me, learned my weaknesses, and was now playing their cards perfectly. We decided to dig deeper into the financial records, hoping to trace the source of the forged documents. It was a needle in a haystack, but we had no other option. Hours turned into days, and each lead we followed seemed to fizzle out. Just as I was beginning to lose hope, Mark came across something interesting. An unusually large and specific transaction made from a department account, one that was never flagged by the usual auditing processes. "Look at this," Mark said, pulling up the file on his laptop. This wasn't a routine transaction. Someone authorized a payment to an external consultant. But the account doesn't match any of our usual vendors. And the amount, it's too high for a simple consultation. I leaned in, my mind racing. Could this be the same person who's been sending the emails? Could they have hired someone to forge the documents? "Could be," Vincent said, looking over Mark's shoulder. "We need to follow the money. If this external consultant has ties to anyone inside the company, that could be our smoking gun." We dove into the investigation, carefully combing through the details of the payment. After several more hours of research, we found a name that kept coming up. Eric Mills. Eric was a former employee, someone who had been let go under Trevor's management for questionable behavior. He hadn't been in the company for a couple of years, but his connections to Trevor's old circle were undeniable. "Of course," I muttered, the pieces clicking into place. This all points back to Trevor's influence. Eric must be the one behind the emails, but who's pulling his strings now? Vincent raised an eyebrow. "It could be Trevor. Maybe he's still trying to get revenge from the outside, orchestrating everything through someone he trusts." I thought back to the last time I had seen Trevor. How he had left the company, seemingly defeated, but with a dangerous, quiet resentment in his eyes. If he hadn't given up, if he had found a way to still pull the strings, it would explain everything. Eric, working as a shadowy figure, stirring trouble from the outside, feeding the misinformation that was slowly turning the board against me. "We need to get to Eric," I said, determination hardening my voice. He's our lead. And if he's working with Trevor, we can't let this go any further. The next day, I had my team discreetly gather everything they could on Eric. His recent activities, any business ventures, any connection he had to the company. We had to move quickly. This was our chance to end this before it spiraled out of control. And then, just as we thought we had the upper hand, I got a phone call from HR. They had just received an anonymous tip about a security breach in the system. Someone had gained unauthorized access to sensitive company data, including financial reports and internal emails. My stomach dropped. "Is it Eric?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "We're not sure yet," the HR director said, her voice tense. "But we've locked down the system and are doing a full audit. I'll let you know if we find anything." That was it. This was no longer just a matter of reputation. It was a corporate war, and I was at the center of it. That evening, after a long day of tracking leads and monitoring the audit, I received a call from Vincent. His voice was low, almost conspiratorial. "You need to meet me in person, now." I grabbed my coat and headed out of the office. When I arrived at the cafe we'd used before, Vincent was already there, his face tense. He handed me a folder, and I could see from the way his hand trembled that something was seriously wrong. "I found it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I opened the folder to reveal a series of emails, each one from a different account. But the content was chillingly similar. Plans to undermine me, details of every move I had made since taking over the company, and, worst of all, instructions for Eric to keep feeding false information to the board. "This is bigger than I thought," I said, my voice tight with anger. "Eric's been working with someone on the inside. And whoever they are, they've been planning this for months." Vincent leaned back, his face pale. "There's more. The emails, they trace back to someone high up. Someone who's been feeding the board the wrong information about you. I think it's time to confront them." And just like that, the walls closed in. Whoever was behind this wasn't just some rogue employee. They were someone within the very heart of the company. The stakes had just gotten much higher. The walls of the cafe felt like they were closing in on me. The folder Vincent handed me weighed heavily in my hands as I absorbed the magnitude of what we'd just uncovered. Someone inside the company was orchestrating a campaign to destroy me, and I had no idea who it was. The emails were clear. Eric had been acting as a pawn, following orders from someone with direct access to the board, someone with the power to manipulate the company's narrative. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Whoever was behind this had a deeper understanding of the company's inner workings than anyone could have imagined. They had to be in a position of influence, possibly someone who had spent years building connections, playing the game just as I had. The thought of one of my own colleagues, someone I had worked with, being the one to sabotage me made my blood run cold. "Vincent, this is bad," I said, my voice strained. "This isn't just about power or revenge. Whoever this is has been feeding the board false information, manipulating things from behind the scenes. They know exactly what they're doing." Vincent's expression was grim, but he didn't back down. "We need to confront them now, before they can do more damage." I nodded, though uncertainty gnawed at me. We couldn't afford to make any wrong moves. We didn't know exactly who this person was, but we had enough intel to piece together a suspect list. And now, we had to act swiftly. We spent the next few hours analyzing the emails and tracing back the breadcrumbs, meeting schedules, phone records, even encrypted messages. Everything led to one person, Evelyn Carrington, the chief financial officer. Evelyn was a key figure in the company, known for her sharp mind and no-nonsense attitude. She had risen through the ranks by playing the corporate game better than anyone, always appearing calm and in control. To everyone outside her inner circle, she was a trusted leader. But what if that controlled facade hid something darker? What if she had been behind the smear campaign against me from the start? "She's the one," I said, staring at the data on my screen, a sickening realization dawning on me. "Evelyn. She's been using Eric as a scapegoat, but she's been pulling the strings all along. She's the one feeding the board the lies. Vincent's face tightened as he took a step closer. It makes sense. She has the knowledge, the access to all the financials. She could easily manipulate the books and use the power of the board to orchestrate this. If she's trying to undermine you, she's not going to stop until she's in control. I felt a surge of anger rush through me. Evelyn's betrayal was personal, not just professional. She was a woman I had trusted, respected even. I had worked with her countless times, relied on her judgment during crucial decisions. To think she had been working against me the entire time, lying, scheming, setting traps, was infuriating. We need to confront her directly, I said, my voice low and steady, though the anger bubbled beneath the surface. She's been working with Eric, but she's the one behind all of this. We need evidence, concrete proof. Vincent nodded, but there was a note of caution in his voice. Are you sure we want to go after her directly? She's not someone to take lightly. If she has control over the board, this could backfire in ways we can't predict. I ran a hand through my hair, thinking it over. It was risky, but we couldn't wait any longer. We needed to cut off the head of the snake before it got any worse. I had already lost too much to people like Trevor. This time, I wouldn't let it happen again. No more games, I said, finally making up my mind. We confront her. We expose everything we have, and we end this now. The next day, I requested a private meeting with Evelyn. I had no idea how she would react, but I knew I couldn't let this drag on any longer. I called her into my office, locking the door behind us once she entered. I could see the confident mask she always wore faltering just slightly as she noticed the cold determination in my eyes. Is there something you need, Evelyn? I asked, keeping my tone professional but firm. Evelyn seemed to hesitate for a moment before she sat down across from me, her eyes calculating. I was wondering when you'd finally bring this up. You've been rather quiet lately. I leaned forward, fixing her with a piercing gaze. I know what you've been doing, Evelyn. I know about the emails, the manipulation, and the way you've been trying to destroy me. It's over. Her lips curled into a tight smile, but there was no warmth in it. You think you can expose me? You really believe you have the evidence to back up your accusations? I don't just think it, I said, pulling out the folder with the incriminating emails and transaction logs. I placed it in front of her. I know it. Evelyn's eyes flickered for a fraction of a second, but she quickly regained her composure. You've been digging into things you don't understand. This company has more at stake than your petty vendetta. You're out of your depth. Maybe, I said, my voice growing colder. But I don't need to understand every game you've been playing. I only need to know enough to stop you. You've been feeding the board false reports, sabotaging projects, and using Eric to do your dirty work. But you've been too careful, too controlled for too long. And now you're finally slipping. Evelyn's smile vanished, replaced by a steely glare. You have no idea what you're up against. You think you can topple me? I've been here long before you. The board trusts me. They'll never believe your lies. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms across my chest. We'll see about that. Because if this gets out, if I show the board the evidence I have... Don't you dare, she cut in, her voice suddenly icy. You don't know what I'm capable of. I'm the one who controls the numbers, the projections, the vision of this company. Without me, everything you've worked for will crumble. You'll be nothing. I met her glare with one of my own. We'll see. Because I'm not backing down. And you're not going to destroy me. Evelyn's face twisted with barely contained fury. She knew she was losing control. The calm, calculated facade was cracking. For a moment, it looked like she might lunge at me. But then her composure returned and she stood up. You've made a dangerous enemy, she said, her voice low and venomous. I will not be taken down this easily. If you think you've won, you're sorely mistaken. As she left the room, I felt a sense of finality. The battle lines were drawn. But this fight was far from over. Evelyn might have thought she had the upper hand, but she was mistaken. I had the truth on my side. And that was a weapon more powerful than any lies or manipulation she could throw at me. Now, it was time to finish this, and I would make sure she couldn't hurt anyone else again.